There is a tiny moment queer people know all too well. Someone asks, "Do you have a girlfriend?" Or "Is your wife joining?" And suddenly a completely ordinary conversation becomes a decision. Do I correct them? Do I say my husband? Do I have the energy for this today? Because sometimes you want to be brave. And sometimes you just want to buy vegetables without becoming a community outreach program in L4. This is the thing people do not always understand about coming out. They think it happens once, one big announcement, one dramatic reveal, and then you move on with your life. But coming out is not one moment. Maybe this is why pride still matters. Because if coming out is something we keep doing, then pride is not just the celebration that comes after. It is the thing that reminds us we are not doing it alone.
It's Wednesdays.
Hello, hello, hello to the gays, the straights, the in-betweens, the allies, the curious, and everyone else spiritually buffering through the week. Welcome back to another episode of Wednesdays with Woody, where we are interrupting your midweek steak to bring you a Pride Month reflection on coming out, being seen, and why the rainbow still needs receipts. And let me just start off by saying that it's not just welcome back to another episode, but welcome to season 6. Season 6. I absolutely cannot believe it. I'm incredibly shocked. I started this podcast with a microphone and a few feelings and the audacity of a gay man who discovered he had opinions and access to recording software. A dangerous combination. Society really should have intervened earlier. But here we are, or rather, here we still are. Still talking, still bringing the drama, still trying to turn emotional chaos into content with a theme song. Growth. Or at least a consistent brand identity, which in this economy is basically spiritual maturity. It feels right to begin this new season in Pride Month. Feels kind of poetic. This episode lands on the first Wednesday of Pride Month, the month where the world becomes slightly more colorful, queer people become slightly more visible, and somewhere in a marketing department, a straight person named Kevin, we see you, Kevin, is asking whether slay should be capitalized in the campaign copy. Well, Kevin, you can put down the Canva template now. But this year Pride feels a little bit different. The rainbow is still there. The glitter, the chosen family group chats are still there. But something else has gone quiet. The brands, the sponsors, the companies that used to arrive every June saying, "We love the LGBTQIA+ community," and then vanish on the 1st of July like a man on Grindr who said he was looking for connection. So today, we're talking about Pride. Not only as a parade, a logo, a party, or a limited edition tote bag nobody asked for, but somehow everyone owns. This episode is about pride as the reason coming out becomes less lonely. We're talking about why visibility matters, why representation changes what people believe is possible, and why pride remains necessary even when the rainbow logos get quieter. We're going to look at coming out as an ongoing practice. Visibility, representation, corporate pride, pullback, maybe even the South African gap between legal rights and everyday safety. And somewhere in the middle of all of that chaos, maybe we'll find a sharper way to understand Pride. Not as a month of rainbow performance, but as a practice of making queer truth livable. So, Before we get into the big cultural conversation, let us begin with the smaller truth underneath it. The room changes when a person tells the truth, after all. I used to think that Pride was one of those events you could easily file away, like graduation or getting your first job, or realizing that adults do not know what they're doing either. They just have, endless calendars. I thought you came out, survived the awkwardness, processed the family reaction, found the language, did the healing, maybe bought a better moisturizer, and then moved on. I thought there would be a before and after. Like before truth and after truth, or before fear and after freedom. But life, damn, she is hella rude. What I've learned is that coming out is not a single event. It is emotional admin, recurring emotional admin, like renewing your license, except instead of paperwork, you are constantly negotiating other people's assumptions about your life. And there's no online portal, no reference number, no efficient government office, as if there ever was. Just vibes, microaggressions, and the occasional auntie asking, so, when are you having kids? It happens in tiny, ordinary ways. A sentence lands, a form gives you 2 boxes, and neither of them feels like enough. A colleague says something harmless but heterosexual by default. A stranger assumes. A family member asks a question with the confidence of someone who has never met a boundary. And suddenly, you have to decide how much truth the room gets. This is one of those quiet absurdities of queer life. The ordinary is not always ordinary. Small talk is not always small. A pronoun can become a border crossing. A wedding ring can become an announcement. A sentence can become a risk assessment. And I know that sounds heavy, but it's also a little funny. Deeply funny, actually. Queer people live inside these strange little contradictions all the time. One minute you're deciding whether to disclose your marriage to a stranger, and the next minute you're wondering if the potatoes are on special. Existential dread and grocery budgeting. But this is why Pride matters. Because that tiny moment is not tiny when you carry it alone. It becomes less lonely when you know there's a community behind you. It becomes less impossible when you have seen other people survive it. It becomes less dangerous when the culture around you has made room for the truth before you have to say it. Coming out is a personal act. Visibility is the public signal. And representation is the cultural proof. Therefore, Pride is the collective ritual that holds it all together. I want to take a moment to talk about June. June is widely recognized by LGBTQIA+ people the world over as Pride Month because of the Stonewall uprising in New York in June 1969, I think. And Stonewall was not a polite brunch. It was not a panel discussion with lanyards. It was not a brand activation, miniature cupcakes and a hashtag no one remembers. It was a rebellion, a refusal. People who had been harassed, policed, shamed, and pushed to the margins simply said enough. That matters because Pride was not born from decoration. It was born from refusal. It began because invisibility was enforced. Queer people were told to hide, to whisper, to disappear into acceptable silence, and only exist where the dominant culture would not have to look directly at them. So visibility is not vanity. Visibility is resistance. And every year, someone rolls their eyes and asks, do we still need Pride? They usually say it in that tone people use when they think they're being reasonable, but really are just bored by someone else's liberation. Every time someone asks that question, what they're really asking is whether visibility has become excessive, whether representation has gone too far, whether queer people have had enough space now and should quietly return to being tasteful, grateful, and conveniently invisible. But pride was never only about being seen. Pride is about changing what the world does when it sees us. It's about the child who sees two men holding hands and realizes love has more than one shape. It's about the teenager who watches a queer presenter, an artist, an athlete, a pastor, a parent, CEO, uncle, and thinks, maybe, just maybe, I'm not the end of the bloodline. Maybe I'm not a scandal, and maybe I can be a beginning, a new way of thinking. It is about the person who is not ready to come out yet, but needs evidence that life exists on the other side of their fear. That is why visibility matters. Not because a queer person wants to be public, not because everyone must be loud, not because pride is a compulsory performance where you must wear glitter, post a selfie, and educate your uncle in the family WhatsApp group until your blood pressure packs a small bag and leaves. Visibility matters because silence has consequences. When people do not see queer life, they start believing queer life is rare, or shameful, or tragic, or imported, or something that happens to other families, other countries, other people. Afraid or not surrounded by possibility, that silence can become a prison with very polite curtains. Pride interrupts that silence. Pride says, here we are, not as a theory, not as scandal, not as a debate topic, not as a segment on someone's moral panic show, as people, as neighbors, as children, as parents, as partners, colleagues, friends, complicated, funny, tired, hungry, overthinking human beings with rent, ancestors, and dare I say, lower back pain. And let us be honest, some days pride looks like surviving one more conversation with someone who says, I don't have a problem with gay people, I just don't understand why it has to be everywhere. Everywhere? Beloved, we have one rainbow mug at a Woolies and a Netflix subplot. Heterosexuality has had every billboard, every fairy tale, every wedding magazine, every insurance advert, and 400 years of bad poetry. I'm pretty sure you can just, give us June and tote bag to go. But visibility alone is not enough. Heaven forbid. I've spoken a lot on this podcast about representation, about why it matters and its importance. Representation is not only about seeing someone exactly like you. Sometimes it's about seeing a possibility you did not know you were allowed to want. A black queer kid seeing a black queer elder. A young gay man seeing marriage without shame. A trans teenager seeing a future that is not only about survival. A queer person of faith seeing someone pray without amputating themselves. A parent seeing another parent love their queer child without treating acceptance like a Nobel Prize. A husband saying, my husband in a room and not apologizing for the grammar of his life. These things matter. They build a world before someone has to enter it alone. And maybe this is where coming out and representation meet. Coming out is not only telling people who you are, it is stepping into a world that may or may not have made room for you. Representation is one way the world starts making room before you arrive. One of the biggest stories heading into Pride Month this year is the shrinking of corporate pride support in parts of the world, especially in the United States, but we are not going to do a deep dive into that. But after years of rainbow campaigns, sponsor banners, pride collection, and brand statements, some companies are suddenly quieter. Very interesting, very revealing, very we support you until supporting you requires a meeting with legal. So now we're watching companies do what companies do often. When values become expensive, they reassess, which is corporate language for we are about to disappoint you in a very polished font. Now, let me be clear. Corporate pride was never enough. The Pride logo was never liberation. A limited edition Pride bottle was not going to dismantle homophobia, though I'm sure Kevin in marketing gave it a little brave try. Well, between budget approvals and campaign titles. When companies pull back, it sends a message to queer employees, to young people, to community organizations, to families, to politicians watching for weakness, to every person who already suspected that support was conditional. It tells people, we like you better when loving you was easy. And that's dangerous. Not that a logo disappears, the logo was never the point. The danger is what the disappearance signals. It tells people that visibility is negotiable, that representation is seasonal, that queer support is acceptable when the comments are friendly, the market research is clean, and nobody important gets uncomfortable. But pride without protection is branding. Visibility without courage is decoration. An allyship that vanishes when queer and trans people become politically inconvenient was never allyship. It was market positioning with a better playlist. The strange thing is that queer people have not disappeared. Our families have not disappeared. Our communities have not disappeared. Our cultural influence has not disappeared. The only thing that seems to have shrunk is the courage. And maybe this is why this moment feels so clarifying. Anyone can love LGBTQIA plus people when love is trending. Anyone can post a flag when the comments are friendly. Anyone can celebrate Pride when Pride is a party. But the test was never the party. The test is what happens when the music stops. Who stays? Who funds? Who protects? Who speaks? Who still says our names when the room gets quiet? That is the receipt check. You know, one of the mistakes we make, it has been a while, I feel like I'm rambling here. You know, one of the mistakes we make in June is importing American Pride discourse wholesale. Like a badly fitted jacket. We put it on and pretend it fits, but the shoulders are just wrong, darling. They're wrong. It's not going to work. June Pride is largely a Northern Hemisphere, American-driven cultural moment. South Africa's Pride calendar is a little bit different. Cape Town's Pride happens early in the year. Johannesburg's Pride, I think, Johannesburg's Pride is somewhere in October. I think they're still the Nice and the Pink Glories. I think they're still that. That has its own rhythm. And Durban Pride sits closer to June. So when June arrives here, our job as South Africans is not to simply copy and paste American talking points into a South African caption. No, hell no. Our story is different. Our legal history is different. Our dangers are different. And our hope is also very different. South Africa has one of the most extraordinary legal foundations for LGBTQIA plus rights in the world. Our constitution protects people from discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. Same-sex marriage became legal here around about, I think, 2006. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Cape Town will host World Pride in 2028, the first African city to do so. That is not small. That is not decorative. That is history. That is architecture. In South Africa, pride lives in the gap between the constitutional promise and what the street, the family table, the workplace, and the body still have to negotiate. A right on paper does not always walk you safely home. A marriage certificate does not protect you from every stare. A constitution does not stop every fist. A court ruling does not automatically change a family dinner. A pride flag can still be vandalized. A queer person can still be targeted. A dating app can become a hunting ground. A public figure can still speak about queer people like we're a moral surge leak instead of human beings with grocery lists, ancestors, and that lower back pain again. This is the South African contradiction. We have legal visibility, but not always social safety. We have constitutional protections and everyday negotiations. We have marriage equality and people still calculating where they can hold hands. Not the cute calculation. Not, will this angle look good on Instagram? The other one. The one about survival. Can I kiss him here? Can I say my husband in this room? Can I correct this person? Can I wear this? Can I be soft? Can I be seen? Can I be safe? That is the gap. And pride lives inside that gap. Which means South African pride can not only be celebration. It has to be about enforcement. It has to be about memory. It has to be about accountability. It has to ask whether the rights written into our constitution are being felt in ordinary queer bodies, in ordinary queer lives, on ordinary streets, and in ordinary homes. Because what is the point of world-leading law if queer people still have to shrink themselves to survive a taxi ride? What is the point of marriage equality if saying my husband still becomes a social gamble? What is the point of pride if it becomes a poster instead of a promise? I feel like I've been talking for aeons. Aeons. And these questions are big and terrifying and wild and crazy. So what now? And not in a grand, go change the world by Thursday. Hell no. We have jobs tomorrow. We have laundry. And some of us have not replied to messages from 3 weeks ago. Let's not add global liberation to the to-do list before breakfast. But what now in the human sense? Maybe this week, pride begins with one honest question. Where am I safe enough to be a little more honest? Maybe it's saying my husband without apologizing for your tone. Maybe it's correcting someone gently. Maybe it's not laughing at that joke. Maybe it's telling a friend what you actually need. And maybe it's letting yourself feel joy without waiting for permission. I keep thinking about people who are still in the corridor. Not fully hidden, not fully out. Somewhere in the in-between. The liminal space, which is the beautiful spiritual term for nobody knows what the hell is happening here yet. Maybe that is you. Maybe you are out to some people, but not others. Maybe you're out online, but not at home. Maybe you're out to your friends, but no one in your family knows. Maybe your body knows before you have language to express that. Maybe you're still trying to separate desire from fear, truth from survival, faith from shame, love from what you were told love has to look like. There is no single correct timeline. I need you to know that you're not late, you're not cowardly, and you're not less valid because your story is complicated. The world loves clean stories because clean stories are easier to sell. But many queer lives are not clean stories. They are layered, interrupted, delayed, coded, whispered before they are spoken, lived in fragments before they become whole. And that's okay. Pride is not only for the people already dancing in the street. Pride is also for the person watching from the window, the person saving photos, the person listening to podcasts, the person quietly trying on a name, the person deleting their search history, the person rehearsing a sentence, the person who is not ready but is getting closer to themselves. I want you to know that you are honored without demanding to see you before you are ready. So here we are, season 6, Pride Month, a new beginning. And maybe the perfect place to end today's episode is with this truth. Coming out is not something we finish. It is something we keep learning how to do. With ourselves, with others, with the world, with more humor, with better boundaries, with less shame, and with more love. Maybe that is what Pride is really celebrating. Not only that we came out once, but that we keep coming back to ourselves again and again and again. Every time the world misnames us, every time someone assumes, every time shame tries to hand us an old script, every time we choose truth, even quietly, every time representation gives someone a future they did not know that they could want, every time visibility makes one more room less lonely, every time we love without apologizing, every time we remember that our lives are not mistakes to be explained, but stories to be lived. That is pride. Pride is a practice, a return, a becoming, a holy little refusal to disappear from yourself and from the world. Pride is not the proof that the work is finished. Pride is the reminder that the work belongs to all of us. So, welcome to season 6 of Wednesdays with Woody, and happy Pride Month. To everyone out, coming out, half out, quietly out, loudly out, spiritually out, emotionally buffering, still rehearsing, still healing, still becoming, there is room for you here. And if no one has told you this lately, let me say it plainly. You do not have to become someone else to be worthy of love. You do not need to make yourself or your life smaller to make someone else's more comfortable. You do not have to come out on anyone's timeline but your own. But whenever you do come closer to yourself, even privately, even quietly, even in a whisper, that counts. That is pride too. The rainbow logos might have gotten quieter this year, but that is definitely not the end of pride. Maybe that is the sound of the room clearing. Maybe now we can hear each other again. Because pride was never really about the logos. It was about the people. It was about the refusal. It was the proof. It was the ritual that said we are still here, still seen, still becoming, still making room for the next person who meets that small room, that small door in an ordinary place and wonders if they're brave enough to tell the truth. The closet may have held us once, but it does not get to define the architecture of the rest of our lives. Also, the closet has terrible lighting, Just terrible lighting. It's really bad in there. Oi, this has been Wednesdays with Woody. If this episode gave you language for something you've been carrying, you can follow the rest of season 6. I'm going to keep making room for the stories we were taught to hide. Until next week, I'm sending you softness, I'm sending you courage, and a good sense to leave any room that asks you to shrink. Until next week, my loves.